but we won't wait too long, mainly because I'll give my short little plug to interfacing before we pass on the speech to Allan to take over and he's got some great content to share with you guys today. So let's get started. So we're happy to be hosting Allan, who's the VP from ICF, today's webinar. Just a bit of a shameless plug for interfacing. As you see, I got my interfacing shirt on here. Won't take up too much time because I'm sure you're all here to hear and what Allan has to share. But just who is interfacing, for those of you who aren't aware of our organization, the company, actually, Allan, if you could switch slides, has been around for many years, over 25 years in the BPM space originally, and now much more than BPM, covering quality management, governance, risk and compliance, and really a platform from digital transformation all the way through to automation. So the organization, we have offices around the world. Our applications available in multi-lang support. The organization has over 1 million users. We are recognized by Gartner in multiple different quadrants as a leader, anything from the latest being digital twin to business operating systems, which relates directly to transformation programs, or more traditional enterprise business process analysis, as well as other industry groups covering the spectrum of knowledge management, governance, risk compliance, quality management. It's really our core business, and we are really, truly our pure play vendor. Next slide, Allan. So what is it that we do? Without going into much detail, we turn your documentation into data, so that you can manage content as fragments and then provide individualized views of your data to your specific individuals, whether that be on your mobile, on a tablet, as well as in customizable documentation, meaning everything is kept in sync. You define it once and you provide different views based on the audience, as well as different outputs and reports based on the audience. There is a short video that you will be able to click on your own. We don't have time today, but after the session, go ahead and take a look. It gets into more detail of how we actually do this, parsing documents and managing data. Next. So interfacing has 2 major platforms as part of its suite. One being our integrated management system, which is once we've actually fragmented all of those documents into reusable, manageable content. This is content such as your processes, procedures, your roles, your systems, your metadata, your roles and responsibility, risks, controls, regulations. It's really one central repository to manage all of your business entities, and then reuse this content and propagate changes, analyze impacts, integrated review and approval cycles, dealing with things like variance management against, one regulation or one process and how it differs in country A versus country B, or between user A and user B. They may have it in different languages, they may have it in different looks and feels, they may have different content. And next slide. And then this repository content, we can then, our suite also has a full low-code rapid application development platform, which actually allows you to turn that documentation into real life. So fast tracking the automation of your enterprise, all those processes that currently sit outside of your ERP, your CRM, any other tools that you have in-house today that may not communicate well, that are fully manual. Well, our system allows you to focus on the business needs for our automation, has a full stack of capabilities, taking away the complexity of really the work that goes into developing apps, right? Mobile, scalability, security, stability, DB design, all these things, rules engine, process engine, dashboard manager. It's really a full stack for automation. with that, the last thing I want to say on the next slide is that what's very unique within our solution is our ability to satisfy all the regulatory requirements as well. So we deal frequently with highly regulated industries, whether that be airline, FAA, pharmaceutical, the FDA, a utility, dealing with compliance standards such as GDPR for data governance and security, ISO 27000, right, your ISMS program, quality programs. So we have all these regulatories baked into our solution to satisfy them. Things such as digital signatures, encryption levels, audit trails, security, so on and so forth. And with that being said, I'll now pass it on to Allan. So Allan, thanks for coming today, much appreciated.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Scott. A quick introduction to myself. I've been in mostly the MRO space for aviation, spending the last 32 years of my life, but what you will see today is this is more around business process reengineering, or business process solution blueprinting is what we like to call it. And what we see is operations being sort of relevant for IT adoption, and starting, of course, with your business processes. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, good night if you are in other parts of the world, but thanks for joining us today. What we have seen over the last 6 or so months is really a higher level of IT systems adoption, and of course this has been born out of necessity because of COVID-19. And we thought that, you know, this would be an opportune time for us to introduce this topic, because of again, it's really born out of need. But as you move forward, and as of course everyone is adjusting, we see business processes as needing change throughout the organization. So today we will cover, first of all, you know, who ICF is. That's going to be very brief. Introduce the topic itself, and why blueprinting of business processes with IT systems is indeed an important aspect of this. How you can go ahead doing your adoption study. Now, one point I would make about the adoption study is that if you're doing implementations of systems, this blueprinting methodology also applies. In this context, though, for today, we'll talk about how you can reverse engineer, if you will, your blueprint for how you're using systems, and then getting a where you are, and then move it into improvement programs. You heard Scott talk about the tool set that Interface and Technology brings, and we would talk about how EPC, the Enterprise Process Center, supports this methodology and philosophy. And then we'll conclude and, of course, take some questions. So who's ICF? ICF exists around the world, 67 offices. We're not a tiny company, but we're also not very large. 7,000, just about 7,000 people. We pride ourselves in terms of being truly multinational, and with about just over $1.2 billion in revenue. We fit into, you know, sort of the smaller type of consulting companies in the world. Our practices are across several industries, but we tend to focus more on the horizontal type of work, which is digital transformations, for example, analytics, IT system implementations, or even large-scale program implementations. A quick reference here for you guys would be, we work both in private and public sectors, and we've been involved in almost every disaster recovery program, federal program in the United States, I would say over the last 10 or 15 years. And again, we get involved also in engagement programs, which is outreach and marketing as to how building brand loyalty and customer-centric programs. To introduce the topic today, and you will see a small poll coming up to ask you where you are on the spectrum, and we'll pause for that. But it is estimated that from our own research and our own projects that people today using the latest firms today using the latest organizations, the latest releases that the organizations use across operations, and our research tells us that's about 40% usage in terms of where people are from a release standpoint on the latest releases. And then what's installed and what's available, which is how much functionality these systems afford, are just about 60% or less. And then now, starting from a business process standpoint or business tasks and what roles and responsibilities of staff have to endure in the organization, is just about 50%. Now, of course, it goes without saying that these numbers are, not where they need to be. So again, we'll pause for a bit until Scott, those results come in to see where people stand in terms of their adoption and where it stands today.
Yeah, so we did collect the poll results, Alan, and actually 60% say that they're not currently on the latest release within their core application. Interesting.
So again, it's consistent kind of with what we found, and we were of course a little more conservative with 40%. So it shows that it's important, moving forward. And before we go into how you can optimize, if you will, your software tools, again, I would say that COVID-19 has caused every organization, think about the very next time that you enter your office space, and in terms of your personal safety and how you interact with your colleagues and how you interact even with your office space itself and the things that are in the office and how different that is. So just stop for a moment and think about business processes and how all of these processes have to change, right? The way we shop, the way we go into a grocery store, for example, is different, right? And how, we actually do our shopping pre-COVID. So it's the same thing that's going to occur in our professional lives. So the first thing here is business processes is where we want to start, right? And again, how much technology are you engaging, if you will, as you do your activities? And a sort of again, a quick reference here for you is everybody now is talking about touchless or contactless, right? I even received an update to my credit cards in the mail where it's all contactless now. Now, of course, the technology is not yet out there where it's going to accept contactless. But of course, again, how much touching you do is very important. So measure how well your business process is with technology, and then also define the gaps and any opportunities that may exist from what you would find in terms of your usage. Define a strategy for those improvements, and that strategy is not just a one and done, right? We believe, again, the timing is perfect for us to say, here's what our new business processes look like, here's how we are optimizing our use of technology, but embed a culture of continuous improvement, setting up a continuous improvement framework, and then having in place all the roles and responsibilities and how you delegate across the organization, so that if process changes, if the organization changes, or of course if the system version releases, you get patches and that kind of stuff, how do you institutionalize this, right, moving forward? So that's basically what we will cover. So the adoption study itself, as you look at this model, when people are implementing systems, what happens is that they tend to look in the second column first, which is I've just bought a system and let's look at what the system does. And then they basically bury themselves in trying to understand that. Now, a quick reference that we use out there is we all use Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word, we use Microsoft tools in the way that we do things, but there is no one person that knows everything that Excel does. And that's the same thing same kind of thinking you have to apply to any enterprise software. So if you try to learn everything the software does, you'll never stop learning, of course, right? And there's several different ways as to how you can use software. So that's why we start with one. Define who you want to be from a business processes standpoint, and construct that catalog. And again, what we have found is that you look at systems, ERP systems or best of breed systems for human resources, finance, any particular area, even operation management systems. They typically cover 70–80% of the same type of functionality, they just do it differently. So you starting with a business process catalog of your organization and breaking it down in terms of functions. And again, the reason why we use functions versus departments is it's really a functioning organization that crosses different departments. So then again, you don't get into silos, and you have several stakeholders across the organization sort of sharing in the same function. Build those into process maps, and you see a red border around this. One of the things that we at ICF have done is we have built process models for different types of organizations, right? So if you are a manufacturing organization, or you are a maintenance organization, you're maintaining facilities, or you're maintaining assets, there are defined process maps for how you do each one of these. And again, as I said, 70–80% of this is really common in terms of the process exists, but of course the best ways of doing it can come from many sources. Have the tasks and decisions recorded into those process maps, so it's the relative level of detail. And then the Pareto rule, 80–20 rule, right? That basically says focus on the important few versus the trivial many. The important few would be what's in your critical path, the value added, the high-risk tasks. And then moving across to the IT systems now is take an inventory across every single technology application that exists. But you have to break it down in a modular fashion as to what's supporting a particular business function. Because again, if you know what we are doing here is we are mapping process objects to software objects. And you end up with the solution blueprint. Now, the way you use your iPhone for a particular application, or if you use an Android device, let's say a banking application, and the way I use it could be different. And that's where this comes in, right? The way that you interact with the system and what controls that interaction. So there are a lot of back-end configuration options and settings that people can use. And you want to optimize that, of course, for the way you do business and the staff roles that, of course, would have to interact with technology. And that leads us into the adoption study. So the software assets here, again, red border that you notice, our work has brought us to many applications, Oracle, SAP, ERP type applications, as well as best of breed applications in the maintenance and manufacturing space. So again, how do you fragment this down into what becomes the truly granular level, and then what are the most optimal configuration pieces that are relevant here? The adoption study are from two levels. So internally, you have technology, as we all acknowledge, we are not using very well the poll that we took earlier, what you have in place. But the other thing that you're not doing as well is what exists out there in the industry. We said before, the rate of innovation is much faster than the rate of adoption. So therefore, you may have available sort of industry type solutions, technology solutions that you have not yet adopted. So that's why you do both an external study as well as the internal study. And that's what you're seeking to optimize. Key questions would be, how many of your business tasks, for example, are you enabling with technology? We talked about touchless, for example, as to where we are. Even this webinar that we're doing now, I can't tell you, how many contracts may have actually been signed over COVID-19 just without people seeing each other, apart from on a little box called a computer screen. And in the words of, the Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella, he said, 2 months, within the last 2 months, on his last earnings call in April, 2 months of technology that projects that people would have entertained over the next 2 years, they've accelerated that within the last 2 months, which is really interesting. So again, it's the same. It shows that it's possible, but how do we pick what we adopt moving forward? So more detail on how you break down that business processes catalog, right? And you have to define your organization, like we said, from a functional standpoint, not departmental. Now, these may look as departments. You have an engineering, planning, production department, of course, finance, HR, other departments as well. But you want to look at it from a functional level, which is what are all the functions contained within these entities. And of course, you may have several stakeholders across multiple organizations. Then build a list of all those processes. in finance, you of course you have payroll, you have budgeting, you have accounting, billing processes. In the maintenance arena, you can have maintenance planning, for example. You have production. In the manufacturing arena, you have engineering. So again, it's really about how you define your organization from a hierarchical process standpoint across functions. And item C here is kind of where the heavy work comes in. It's really building that cross-functional process map. Now, you may have process maps within your organization. The people may already have notional means as to how they have documented this, using probably non-process-centric type applications. But seeing it in this manner, the visual allows you to sort of define, if you will, the details that you need to look at so that you can now improve it. So that's why we recommend that you represent it in a map form rather than textual based, or of course static images. And last but not least, it's really, again, we talked about the 80-20 rule. How do you define what's critical? How do you define the value add and of course high risk? It may be around simply performance, which is timing, so things that need to occur quickly, or there may be compliance oriented or quality type objectives. So again, it's really setting up the framework, and again, we have sort of prescribed frameworks for that, that tells you what should you be measuring. You can't measure everything, of course, right? And then also you need to put the accountability where it applies, in terms of who can influence that performance. So the stakeholders and the actors' inputs are very, very important to that. So now you have a process catalog, and now you want to take the second step is that inventory of all supporting IT systems, and that can be very, very bulky, if you will, on the type of many different ways you interact. What's forgotten most times, though, is some spreadsheet that somebody is doing off the side of their desk, or a form that's filled out to collect information, or some folder somewhere that somebody pulls out and refers to. Standard operating procedures exist and policies exist, but what happens is that the way that people actually do things sometimes is something we have observed as well. These are just documented for the sake of being able to present something, but people operate several times very differently from the real thing, so you want to make sure that you capture all this stuff, right? Because that's how you can optimize. It's really removing some of these, or of course using them more effectively. And as we said before, fragment these down. So some examples here is SAP has several material management, financial accounting, but the best of breed applications as well would refer to different ways of doing things. So you may have a supply chain module, and that supply chain module is how you buy services and materials, of course. But of course, some may just have it within the materials management module. So again, these are just examples as to how you want to make sure that you are truly defining where that functionality exists, from a business standpoint. And then a fairly bulky piece as well here is configurable assets. And these are the options we talked about earlier when I spoke about interact with your iPhone or your Android device, right? It's all those options and all the different ways you can interact with the screen. What we have seen in projects that we have done is several roles may interact with the same screen. And some people may have, of course, an edit button where others don't, right? So these are the options we talk about, and the programs. And these are names that would vary, where they are called parameters, or they are called settings or options. And then, of course, they trigger workflows or emails out, or they go to a queue that somebody can look at in terms of what's next that they need to do. And then you have several tables as well. So, and last but not least, even though you may not use all the functionality, again, earlier on our poll, you said it's about 60% of you on latest releases, but the thing is, you may not use all the functionality, but in order to optimize what you do use, you want to make sure that you do have that setting for all the configuration. So therefore, you want to know what those dependencies are, right? It's how you optimize the software. So you have an inventory of all your processes broken down. You have, of course, the IT systems. And this is what, once you've done these two things and you know how you're using the IT systems for your processes, this is what the meat of this study is about, right? Which are key questions here. How many of your business tasks are truly enabled, with technology, right? Versus you're doing it in some manual fashion, or maybe not even any technology at all, right? And then also for the granularity, how many of those are fully autonomous? So you don't need a person to go to a screen to do something. It's automatically, sending you this. I mean, how many of you have Apple Watches and Fitbit devices? And if you're sitting at your desk like I am now, and you're sitting too long, and then it tells you, you need to get up and walk, right? So again, these are fully autonomous ways of just reading things within the organization and telling you what you need to do next. So that's fully autonomous in terms of, and then of course resetting itself. And how many of those tasks are engaging the software assets that you do have, right? And dimensions can include, and this is the how well, so therefore it's again that performance framework for how you can measure this. So some users, for example, say, okay, I'm scheduling purchasing of materials, but for me to run a forecast of my demand, it's taking 5 minutes to run a forecast for the next 3 months. Well, is that satisfactory enough for your organization? Maybe not. Where you expect 3 seconds, it's taking 3 minutes, for example, or 5 seconds, taking 5 minutes, that kind of stuff. So you want to define those things because, of course, those also direct you to where you need to improve it. And then the data that comes back, again, I can't tell you how many times we've seen people export data out of systems and access databases or Excel spreadsheets, and then that's what they're using. CRM systems, for example, maybe only for the sales people, but not for product people, right? We've seen that many other places. Why, right? When it's designed, of course, to satisfy both stakeholders. So anyhow, it's how you are in fact now depending on the system to do that. And ensure that you do have, again, that 80-20 rule applies, which is your critical, high risk, and of course the value-added process objects are what you're looking at that are more relevant. And then even though some things may not be enabled, you may discover that not everything can be enabled, right? So you have waste, and what is acceptable waste? So we have defined waste in terms of this acronym called downtime. So how much of that do you accept, right? And what's your acceptable level for what you have to accept, right? In terms of waste. So that's important for you as well to measure your organization. The industry gaps. So some things you don't do today, right? So I talked about, touchless, right? I didn't have touchless my credit card, but now, right? So there may be technology options that exist out there that you are not aware of, or you haven't really looked. But if you have defined business processes, now you know that you have gaps in how you're satisfying those, then you know exactly pointedly what to look for. And again, a common mistake is, oh, now people are doing artificial intelligence and machine learning. So how about we explore those? Yes, it's great to explore the technology, but where are you going to apply it? Why, right? And how does it apply to the way that you do business, right? So everybody says, I need a business analytics software, right? But do you really, right? And again, it's not to critique that thinking. It's really how you're approaching that thinking, right? So how available are software assets out there? More importantly, does it fit within my environment? Again, we have seen organizations where they are coupling, forward-thinking technology that have been released within the past year with end-of-life applications. Well, you are straddled with your end-of-life application, right? And there's no way that you can optimize both. So last but not least, it's really how well adopted in the industry and how mature are they. And then also, is it changing more rapidly, right? So again, the rate of innovation we talked about earlier on, is it too quick such that by the time you put it in, it's all gone already? So now you've done the adoption study and the approach, and you know where you stand. This is again a very rudimentary way as to how you want to see a snapshot of where you need to pay attention to. So your processes may not be fully documented. You may not have the tasks classified in the way they should be, and then your systems usage, again, the red, green, yellow here, again, are just sort of examples of indicating where the health is of your organization, your adoption health, so to speak. And this is where we pride ourselves in being able to quickly assess where you are, so it points where you need to improve. Your processes didn't have to be across the firm. It can be within one organizational area, or like we said before, a functional area. So for example, procure payment, for example, as a process where you on that maturity chain. It can be in supply chain, it can be in production, it can be in planning. It doesn't matter what part of your organization, finance, human resources, the philosophy of how you apply this is the same, right? And it's very quick to tell you, where you are on an adoption scale, and then of course identify what your improvements need to be. So once you have a scorecard, you know where it points to in terms of how well you're using systems, and of course how mature your processes are for your organization. And then it points to, should you take internal initiatives or a hybrid of internal and external initiatives, to remedy this situation. We see this as well as not just being adoption of what you have, but a continuous improvement framework as well. And the model for that really is about, before we look into the model itself, let's first of all acknowledge what we see to be implementation missteps for technology. So if we look at people who have recently implemented systems, and I'm referring to folks maybe the last 5 years, the life cycle of certain systems are 20, 25 years now, especially enterprise operation systems. So you want to make sure that what you have put in over the last maybe 5 to 8 years will last you, of course, the next 20 years, and how you're managing that. But some things that we have observed is that people measure project success during after the project. So yeah, we've met our budget, right? We met our timelines. The vendor, of course, gave us a good service level agreement. We turned on the software, and you're done, right? But think about it. You put in place a business improvement system. Notice I didn't say an IT system. Did you really achieve the business improvement that you set out to achieve, right? And how successful has it been? What are those KPIs? How are they being measured? So we are saying that post-live project audits should be less. Adoption audits should be more, right? So as a matter of fact, that's when the work really starts. So after you've turned it on. So how well am I using the system we turned on 5 years ago? Have I achieved it? And again, most times for things to stabilize and settle in, especially enterprise-wide applications, gosh, it takes you about 3 years minimum, to achieve some of those things in terms of learning and change management, right? And that has to be done consistent with good overall of employees, knowledge leaving the organization, tribal knowledge going away, all those kinds of things, right? So you want to make adoption audits are telling you, where you need to really focus. So in steady state, don't treat them as IT and say it's an IT issue, right? Treat them more as business systems, and the functional managers have to bear more responsibility, right? So as we talk about this continuous improvement model, it's really how they're doing that. And your end users, almost in a real-time mode, should know how they need to interact with systems to do their jobs, right? And that's more important, by the way, now today. How many of us are certain how we will navigate, let's say, when we go into the office? How many of us are certain when we drop our kids off to school now and that we're doing the right things? If you have the knowledge right there, this is what you need to do next to interact with anything in your life right now. It's what allows you really to be more effective for what you do, right? So that's where you really want it, which is at a point of use, you want it on demand and you want it tailored for where people, what people are doing as part of their daily roles. And that leads me into the last point here, which is the role screening. It should be linked to processes rather than here's a screen and here's what the screen does. Well, no, right? It's really here's your job and here's how you approach your job. The system is simply a tool for you accomplishing your job, right? And that's important. So again, these are sort of implementation and adoption missteps that we have observed. And because of this, we've put together this checklist of sort of 3 macro sort of things that you're trying to achieve. And the checklist to the left is really the checklist, by the way, is really a structure. So your common and traditional software management approaches. The key characteristics, how you can foster better adoption, but more as into or embed this or internalize this, so you use all these different terms, into your DNA in the way that you operate, right? So if you check the box on every one of these conditions, for example, do you have performance indicators for every staff role, for IT systems, for processes, right? And do you have a measurement system for those? Are you doing adoption studies? Do you have program managers for improvement or for the very next software release? Or for the very next process change, which is today, for example. And do you have business process owners? So program managers are very different from business process owners, by the way. Your program managers is we have a data improvement program, and your business process owners are, I am responsible for procurement to pay process, for example. So again, that's very different. And then who owns software assets? Now, why do we say that? Some screens may be the purview of your billing department or your CRM, like we said before, or your production people or your manufacturing folks. And you really want to make sure that you assign the owners to those screens as well. So it's not just, so therefore they influence, if you will, or they bear the responsibility of where it stands in the organization and the maturity of it. Collaboration tools necessary. You may have several of your own collaboration tools. That's really how you harness those into your continuous improvement program. Maintain a process repository, have custom manuals and change management protocols. So all these conditions, if you can check the list on how our organization really does these things, and you may be at different levels, of course, then you are truly structured, if you will, for your adoption and continuous improvement. The ownership bit is consistent with the conditions, but it's really how now you deploy and you assign and you delegate for people who are owning different parts, if you will, of this continuous improvement program and framework, right? Quality checks, for example, you have governance delegates who are coming to make sure that your repositories are maintained. I mean, I'm certain that if we ask the folks who are here, do you trust everything that you do have on SharePoint or whatever you have today as your internal system for how you are sharing documents, right? And how much do you trust it? I'm certain many people would raise their hands and say, not totally, right? So what's your quality sort of procedure and governance procedures around that? And then end users owning content. So if I'm using a system to do something and I'm out in the field and the help that I can pull up for how I do my job is not quite right, do I have the mechanism to report that in? And are people responsive enough who own that to correct it, such that the very next time I interact with it and I'm doing the correct procedure, right? So to the right of this are the operations, and the operations are around, of course, how you deploy more from a tactical standpoint. We talked about the real-time learning with people in the field. It should be business process focused, so it's not IT focused, right? Of course, IT has a part to play. And then ongoing, so people, again, we've seen where people type assignments within projects, or we have a new release, or we have to manage this new function, if you will, and it's a project, and then everybody goes back to doing business as usual. We think your structure should be around, again, on the operations bit, distributed center of excellence practices that are embedded in the organization. Now, you may not have an entity that's a center of excellence, but you want to make sure that those practices are embedded in the way you operate. So again, that's key to this model, right? It's not an organization, a center of excellence. It's actually the way you operate. It's a behavior.
So just a quick time check, Alan. We have about 10 more minutes.
Okay. Thank you. I like to talk too much. So how does the EPC support this? So we'll spend maybe 5 minutes running through these very quickly. And this is a long list, of course, 7 items, but wanted to make sure that how we now enable this model with the enterprise process center is important. Scott alluded to some of this earlier on, which is bringing in the processes and software objects very quickly, so then you don't have to manually put them in. Then how well are your business processes performing? You need to know where you are, from a performance standpoint on your business side, and then you need to know where you are, item 3, on a technology side. And then to, how do users adopt and so that you can be continuous growth, and then improve processes, comply, and last but not least, keep up to date, right? So we thought that these would be sort of full circle things, how the enterprise process center sort of supports our model. So the first is how you do bring items in. There is an intelligent document parser. If you have items in PDF and Word, in any sort of a textual format, it's easy for us to bring it in a templated fashion, and then voila, you can actually get your process diagrams out of it. It's not 100% accurate, but of course, how you import those in. So using this tool, building, if you will, you have a 600 or 6,000 page manual, very quickly getting that into viewing them as processes and who in fact does what is very important. Like I said before, you may also have Visio, Excel ways of how you document this stuff. And we can import directly from those, and we can import the data files coming out of systems like transaction lists, for example, say settings and the options, data tables, parameters. It doesn't matter what it is. And we do have, of course, an ongoing delivery of some of those as well. But we can bring those in very quickly, so then it can enable the mapping. As a matter of fact, as you import those in, if you already know what the linkages are to screens and so on, we can make those linkages. And of course, last but not least, manually. Now, something must be said about creating manually. When people do this manually, they actually learn the business as well, and they learn the systems consistently. So it is a good way, but if you do have massive, large-scale documentation to start with, then of course going manual is not the very best way to go from the beginning. So how well are your processes performing? There are several ways you can structure how you measure this, but you can visualize it in a dashboard fashion. You can look at it from once you know where your processes are, your measurement systems, on a detailed process list, and you can see each role within the organization, everyone who performs that role, kind of how efficiently you're performing on a metric scale. And then within each process bar on a task level, of course, these are just indicative of what you can get. Like we said before, the 80-20 rule applies. So if you want to look at only tasks within the critical path, it's also easy to define that out. So very quickly, you can know where you stand from a process's performance standpoint. Once you've gotten them in and you've set up your measurement framework, so then that leads into, of course, the improvement. Technology-wise, more specifically, several ways of being able to identify this, right? So we talked about the critical and high-risk tasks and being able to narrow down into the important few. And then you set performance measures as technology, things that you're measuring. The example shown here as the performance measure equal to technology. It's a yellow blended score from yellow and red and green. So you may be acceptable, but it's important to note that you do have some technology items, maybe speed of transaction, that kind of stuff, that may not be satisfactory. And then the software assets, the task. This shows you in the level of detail that can be mapped in terms of all the dependencies that influence a particular screen. And that's important to know. And then the manual versus automated tasks, the red, green, yellow borders actually indicate how automated you are versus user transactions versus non-user transactions, right? Or non-system transactions, which are the reds. Capability mappings are around, okay, how many times within my process set does a particular asset occur? Asset meaning a screen or a configurable asset, a configurable dependency. Very quickly, you can drill into those and of course define your programs. Users on demand on a mobile device can pull up processes and pull up procedures. Those procedures can link directly to your software systems. And this is a huge power, if you will, from an SOP standpoint, just a standard operating procedure standpoint, PC and EPC. Very, very important in the way that your current SOP documented it on a shelf or sitting on a SharePoint folder somewhere or some collaboration platform. This now becomes interactive, right, as to how people are doing their jobs. Managing improvements, so you can have review cycles, delegated ownership, and that's from your conventional, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. So they know when to review something, and then when they review, they provide scores and feedback, right? And that is all real time and online, all electronic, right? So it's part of how you manage your manuals electronically as well. Compliant with policies, rules, risks, and so on can be part of how you are doing your measurement. And then, of course, constructing profiles as to where you stand from a rule compliance standpoint. And then also we talked about, of course, improving that, moving forward from a calendar standpoint, right? And I'm rushing through some of these. Of course, the details of this we can talk about afterwards because I want to get to the questions. And the last is staying up to date, right? So you do have within the application, you do an impact, first of all, you do a plan for how you can narrow those impacts in terms of where they affect, and then you can manage the evolution, if you will, of maturity on different levels. Level 1, maybe simply informing people. Level 2, maybe simply getting your documentation done. So level 3, maybe data fixes. So again, it's really all these different levels as to how you mature. So I'll end here and we'll go on to questions, if you will. We believe that this model satisfies well measuring how you are performing, measuring your level of IT, and once you know what those gaps are, coming up with a program of improvement, and APC enables that very well with this philosophy. So I'll end there and then open it up for questions.
Thanks, Allan. It was great. I liked what you were saying on the rate of innovation being faster than the rate of adoption. I think it's a big statement that organizations always focus on saying how agile they are, but then are still using a waterfall approach in terms of their development of the contract all the way through to the implementation and how long that is. If it's 2 years to get through that, then what you were originally looking at 2 years ago is no longer even applicable.
Yeah.
Right? You're already outdated, so you better start your process over again. It's the wrong approach. Better take what's on the market today, roll it out because tomorrow it'll have evolved again and you can leverage it tomorrow. Quick wins. And I also think what you're discussing around COVID being that obviously that has really fast-tracked digital. What we've heard from clients is it's actually helped in the way that it's forced companies to change their internal policies of things like work from home. It's forced the governments to change laws and regulations, doing notaries being required face-to-face meetings for mortgages, as an example. Like all of this, I think organizations can leverage where we are today. Yes, obviously COVID has been negative overall, but if we look at leveraging what it has done for the world and how they can actually benefit from it within their organization, there's a lot there. We do have a handful of questions, which I'll shoot over to you. So the first one is, they say that they have a challenge whereby, call it stuck in their current state, and how would they speed up the blueprinting phase of processes, their assets, their rules, their people, and then even more so, how can they maintain it after? So I'm guessing it sounds like they're having that challenge of we're just not mature. We don't, we're stuck in that old way of working, and then they tend to skip that whole phase that you've been covering today and go right into the implementation. So I guess, how do you think they could speed up that process of the assessment and then keep it live ongoing?
Well, I think we will start with exactly how everything is documented today, and getting into this sort of a framework, this flat platform, so that you have that visibility, you have that ability, if you will, to assign out ownership and responsibilities to the organization. A key thrust of this philosophy and this methodology is that the business folks should own, if you will, the tasks, the responsibilities, the processes. So having this sort of a framework, first of all, and making that, if you recall the slide that I had on conditions and ownership, is very, very important. But how do you also employ some of these tools to get it into action, right? The EPC tools are really, really handy, and the interfacing tools are really handy of taking large documents and getting them into this kind of framework very quickly, so that you can promote that visibility and ownership. So I like to use the term crowdsourcing for that improvement project, rather than having these very committees, if you will, type relationship, right? So you do disseminate that responsibility out. I hope that's that response to the question, right?
Yeah, I think that's great. The crowdsourcing, I tend to push that as well. You need to engage those that know the processes and procedures, and especially if you want to get to the screen procedural level, give it to the guy who does that, right? That work on a daily basis. He can actually document it. A subject matter expert can fit it into the bigger picture, but the step-by-step, he's a great knowledge source. And moving away from he doesn't need to document it manually. He can, right, create a screen capture. That takes 5 minutes. Create an account in SAP, record it, upload it into a digital format that the next person can benefit. I think it's a great way of working. Next question is, what KPIs have you found are essential to track?
That's a great question, because it depends on what your orientation is. So if it's a data project, then of course the integrity of data. If it's a regulatory project, it's about compliance. If it's about quality, then there's several parts of quality that you want: quality assurance, quality control. So again, it really would be specific, if you will, to what area. On a more macro scale, it would be about the ones we have seen is timing is very, very key. So how long things take to get done, and that's where you set those in. Your productivity is also very key. So are you getting humans to work, right? I mean, whether or not we interact with software or not, right? So, and by the way, timing and productivity can apply to both people as well as assets, quote unquote. The way I'm using assets, by the way, is technology assets, right? So the how well question, the how quick question, speed question, all those are very, very important for knowing, if you will, where you stand. And it would be very specific, but I would say those are quick examples as to the framework. And we do have frameworks that have worked in different organizations, but depending on your vertical, whether you're manufacturing or energy or aviation or that kind of stuff, you can apply accordingly. Yeah.
Great. Someone's asking, have you ever worked in the Medicaid management information system space? And what would be the key challenges to develop the modules and APIs if you've worked, and if you haven't worked in that space, what would you consider the key challenges and resolutions?
So the Medicaid management space, ICF as a company has worked with the opioid crisis in the Midwestern United States, and as a matter of fact, a large-scale program for us. We've also worked with infectious diseases. We are also engaged with the federal government for COVID-19 recovery. So I'd say yes to the medical space. as far as the specific solution to APIs and so on, part of our digital transformation practice does include business analytics and integration frameworks. So we do have a dedicated organization that talks about this from a technology standpoint, and quite happy to talk about this in more detail for the medical space, particularly. Yeah.
And I know on our end, we had done a spin-off at one point focused directly in the healthcare space, and when dealing with transfer of knowledge, I mean, obviously it's all focused around work, in my point of view, working with systems that support HL7 as a ease to transfer data. We have another question here. He's saying, within MNC, who would be the ideal leader for the adoption study initiative?
Within MNC?
Yeah, I'm not sure what MNC stands for.
You know, what we have seen, and it's really interesting. I think it's a good question, not knowing who MNC is, but I would say that, you know, what we are seeing merging, if you will, over the last few years, and sometimes this can be an initiative coming out of the C-level suite, C-suite within organizations, and it can also come out of technology, or it can come out just from the CEO's office that's saying, we need a business process improvement organization, or we need a digital transformation organization, or we need a technology adoption organization. So we've seen more and more an actual substantive role being assigned to someone that becomes a department head. Now, who do they report to? That's interesting. It depends on, like I said, where the initiative is coming from. If the CEO's office, the COO's office, the CIO's office are the three typical ones. And that's who they, but there's always a dotted line to the CEO, right? So where we've seen that emerge. I would say, I don't know who was asked the question, but I would say, you know, if we know more about who MNC is or this particular organization, we can certainly make a recommendation as to where it should fit.
So we seem to have crowdsourced the response. It's they meant a multinational company.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so I think your response still applies, right? It should be the chief operational officer then, because you can have in-country CEOs, and you can have, of course, CIOs that may be focused on technology-only initiatives. So I would say the chief operating officer or the chief operating office, if that's more relevant. Yeah.
Or potentially the CDO nowadays.
Yeah, digital, correct. Yeah. Or transformation, like I said before. Yeah. CTO. Yeah.
I see we're at 12:01, so maybe just wrap up quickly then. Thanks, Allan, honestly, for your time today, and everyone who sat in through this session. As I mentioned, there's going to be a follow-up questionnaire just of a couple of questions that we appreciate all your feedback. And it was great to see some of the screenshots directly from our solution there, Allan. I appreciate that. It's always nice to see someone in the real world, how you've leveraged the tool for real engagements and the output that you've produced. It's excellent. Always happy to see that. If there's any additional follow-up questions, everyone, please feel free to send them. We'll come back to you. We'd be happy to connect either Allan or someone from interfacing side if you're interested more in terms of his services, organization services, or our solutions, no matter where you are located in the globe. And as I mentioned, you will receive a follow-up email, which will contain both the slides as well as the recording of today's session. Feel free to forward it on, share it on social, whatever. We're happy to get the information out there. So thanks again, Allan, much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone. It has been a really good experience. And thanks, Scott, and everyone at Interfacing. Thanks so much.
Take care, bye-bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.